All right, so this is my second long-term goal assignment, and the focus of this presentation will be on phonics. The long-term goal that will be addressed in this PowerPoint by the strategies offered later on in the presentation is to improve phonics or word analysis skills to better understand the relationship between letters and sounds, word parts, and decoding. The instructional goal that goes along with this long-term goal is to improve analysis and recognition of short vowels, CVC words, and word families. The overall goal of phonics instruction is to help children learn the alphabetic principle. The alphabetic principle is the idea that letters represent the sounds of spoken language. Phonics also has a focus on the idea that there is an organized, logical, and predictable relationship between written letters and spoken sounds, and phonics instruction can help children learn the relationships between these letters and written language. Phonics instruction should be systematic, so it's taught in an organized and logical sequence, and it should be explicit or very precisely and logically taught to the students. Students should have frequent opportunities to apply what they are learning, and it is the most effective when phonics instruction begins in kindergarten or first grade. So all of the following information was taken from the Phonics A to Z book by Blevins that is cited at the end of this presentation. In the late 1600s, phonics was accepted and widely used. New England Primer book was published in 1600, and this was an early reading book that placed an emphasis on phonics. It explained phonics instruction to start with the alphabet and move into practice reading simple syllables to reading actual text. The Bible was the primary book of study at this time. This was a bottom-up approach to literacy instruction because it started with the sound spelling relationships and moved up to reading. The method continued unchallenged for over a century and a half, but in the mid-1800s, there was a shift from only the elite few learning to read to educating the masses or the general public. Educating the masses was viewed as important because of this new democracy in the United States. Comprehension became the focus of educators' attention. Led by Horace Mann, the Secretary of Massachusetts Board of Education, this movement sought to diminish phonics teaching. Mann saw phonics as detrimental to creating skilled readers and advocated for a whole word method to literacy instruction. Graded reading books were then created. The whole word method took root in 1920s after teachers tried to fight it. So in the late 1920s to the 1940s, phonics instruction was based on this whole word approach, which was criticized by educators. William S. Gray, who was an educator, led criticisms against this type of phonics instruction. Or he led critics against like the explicit phonics instruction. And he recommended that it be replaced with the look and say method or the whole word method. And he created readers that went along with this approach to teaching phonics. His readers, the Dick and Jane readers, changed reading by providing full color images and stories that appealed to children in his texts. He also used a lot of sight words in the text. This approach to phonics instruction is a top-down approach. And basically it said that sound spelling was learned incidentally and phonics was a last resort. So basically the students were just expected to like try their best and read using the sight words, and then they would, through reading and multiple exposures to reading, they would learn the sound spelling relationships. In 1955, Rudolf Flesson attributed decreases in reading ability to the look-say method in his novel, Why Johnny Can't Read. So he was basically saying that this look-say method, where the students have no phonics instruction and they just read the words that they see on the page, was decreasing student reading ability. He advocated for a return to the bottom-up phonics method. And the general public and the media liked his novel and his idea, but the academic community dismissed him and all of his ideas in his book. The negative aftermath of this book was that there were extreme views placed on the teachers that supported it and extreme views place on the teachers that did not. In 1967, Jeannine Chall wrote Learning to Read, The Great Debate. And this book reflected on a scientific analysis of the reading instruction issue. And in the end, the book advocated for early and systematic phonics instruction in the classroom. So basically, Chall was advocating for a return to the bottom-up method. And a follow-up study has been done, or many follow-up studies have been done, and they all found that direct phonics instruction is the most beneficial to students in the long run. From 1985 to 1995, the importance of phonics instruction was back on the rise. More books were published to outline the importance of phonics instruction, and phonics was identified as one of the essential ingredients in reading instruction. It was acknowledged that other aspects of reading instruction are important, but it was determined that this instruction should not be focused on a top-down or bottom-up approach, but that it should be an interactive model. So the reader should use a combination of background knowledge and phonics knowledge to comprehend a text. Between 1995 and 2006, phonics instruction was becoming more important. In 2001, George Bush set out No Child Left Behind, which increased funding and began to retrain teachers. At this time, there were 5 key areas of reading instruction identified, which were phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary fluency, and comprehension. These 5 key areas are still regarded today and are all very important to students' reading instruction. So from 2007 to the present, there have been many research studies and articles written about the best methods for teaching children to read and for teaching children phonics. And it has been found overall that it's best to use an interactive method with direct instruction and hands-on learning opportunities. The next part of this slide is about the 10 important research findings. So the following information also comes from Phonics A to Z by Blevins and details the 10 important research findings that have been identified in phonics instruction. So the first important finding is that phonics instruction can help all children learn to read. Phonics instruction helps children with decoding, and it can help students who may come to school with less reading experience than other students. Overall, it's just important to provide students with phonics instruction. The second important finding is that explicit phonics instruction is more beneficial than implicit instruction. The third is that most poor readers have weak phonics skills and a strategy imbalance. So students with poor phonics skills tend to over-rely on the use of one particular strategy, like context and picture clues, and these weak phonics skills are causing these readers to do that more often. Another important finding was that phonics knowledge has a powerful effect on decoding ability. The next important finding is that good decoders rely less on context clues than poor decoders. Another important finding is the reading process relies on a reader's attention to each letter in a word. The next important finding is that phonemic awareness is necessary for phonics instruction to be effective. And then the next one, phonics instruction improves spelling ability. The next finding is that a teacher's knowledge of phonics affects his or her ability to teach phonics. And the final important finding is that it is possible to overdo phonics instruction. So these 10 findings were important to note because of the latest information on phonics, because it is the latest information on phonics instruction. The findings that I listed above give teachers and other professionals information about the to teach and plan phonics instruction. So I have identified 3 theories that go along with phonics instruction. One is behaviorism, which was started by B.F. Skinner. And behavior, it basically says that your behavior is shaped by the environment and the people around you. So observation of classmates and the teacher shapes student learning. With phonics, it is a skills-based instructional model for the systematic explicit instruction of literacy skills. And these cognitive activities can be broken down with the skills taught one at a time. So with the teacher modeling and showing the students exactly how to do these different phonics skills, they will be following along with that, and that goes along with behaviorism. Emergent literacy was started by Marie Clay. It's the period in a child's life between birth and their ability to read and write at a conventional level, usually in 3rd grade. Children's development in these areas of listening, speaking, reading, and writing are all interrelated, is what this theory says. So in relation to phonics, this term is used to describe the early period of a child's life, and phonics instruction should begin in kindergarten or 1st grade. And it's also the period where they need this instruction because they are developing their literacy skills. Then the whole language approach is an approach that basically says that all aspects of language, reading, speaking, writing, and listening should be taken into account and taught to students. So phonics instruction is woven into other language instruction and also overall reading and writing instruction. They're all combined when you're teaching students about phonics. And teachers take opportunities to teach phonics when they arise naturally. So if a teacher is reading a story and the students and notices something about like a word family that they've been working on, the teacher should take that time and approach that with the whole language approach and bring up phonics in other aspects of literacy instruction. So the rest of this PowerPoint will be used to describe different strategies and activities that can be done in the classroom to address the instructional goal of short vowel sounds, CVC words, and word families. Developing phonics activities that are engaging for students and explicitly teach them phonics rules is key to their success with phonics in the classroom. So strategy 1 focuses on the short vowel sounds. This would have to be done after our students have learned all their short vowel sounds or with a focus on just one short vowel sound. The activity is called Living Words, and it allows the students to create words and move around the room. So on large note cards, the teacher would write the letters or spellings that you want the students to review. For this activity in particular, you want to connect it to your instructional goal on the card. So you would want the letters on the cards to only be able to make like short vowel sound words. You would give 1 card to each student and have 3 students stand at the front of the room. They will then stand in the order of a word. And obviously, as I said before, you would choose students that have the letters to make a word and then help them create that word. You will then help and show the students how to blend that word so they can say it as a class, and you would have the students in the front of the room say it as well as the rest of the class. And you would continue forming new words or substituting letters to make more words with the remaining cards in the room. This is a short-term activity because it would be done as a practice strategy to work with the short vowel sounds as students are learning them and after they have learned all of them as practice. The best practices from Morrow and Gambrell that I have thought of for this strategy is the first one, implement practices that invite students to be active, contributing members of a literacy community. And best practice 2, understand that maintaining an engaged community requires the ongoing monitoring and adjustment of literacy practices. I thought that both of these practices would be exhibited in this strategy because students are up and around, moving in the room. They're actually creating the words with their bodies. So they're engaged in the literacy community. And it is ongoing adjustment because you would be using words that have the phonics skills that you're working with that week in their classroom. My second short-term activity is sound hopscotch. So the activity sound hopscotch allows students to get up and move while working on the sound spelling relationships of short vowel sounds because that is our instructional goal. This activity could also be done with a focus on CVC words if you wrote those in each of the squares. So to start this activity, you would create a large hopscotch grid on the ground. And you could do this outside with chalk, or you could do it inside your classroom with tape on the floor. I have seen that done in a classroom before. The activity would then move on. Okay. You create the large hopscotch grid, and then in each section, you'll write a sound spelling relationship that you want to review. So you can see in the picture on this slide, they were working with the E sound in eat, seat, meet. So they wrote all of those words. If you wanted to work on the short vowel sound A, you could write cat, bat, mat, sat on all of them. And so to start the game, you will call out a word or a sound that matches one of the relationships that you want the students to be working with, and have the students hop to the space that matches that sound. So if you wanted them to work with short vowel sounds and you had like sat, hat, and then you also had like met, you could say the word cat and they would have to hop to the word cat, and they would have to be able to recognize that that's the short A sound. So when you're calling out a word, you should tell them where in the word the sound is. So if you're doing with the short vowel sounds and CVC words, you would explain that the sound that they're hopping to is in the middle of the word. If you wanted to do this with beginning sounds, you would tell them that it's the beginning sound or the ending sound, depending on what you're working with for this short-term activity. So I have put this in the short-term activity section because you would only be working with one thing at a time, and it would be an activity that you would do every once in a while. You wouldn't use this as your primary literacy strategy in the classroom for teaching phonics. The best practices that I've identified for this are also practices 1 and 2, because the students are up and moving around and they're very engaged in the literacy community. And I identified the second one because the teacher would be monitoring and changing the words that were in the hopscotch as they learned new sound spelling relationships and as they were focusing on new sounds in the classroom. The next strategy is a long-term strategy because it would be added to each time the students learn a new spelling pattern or a new sound spelling relationship. And it would be used throughout the whole school year. So this strategy is a word wall. Pretty much every single classroom I've ever been in has had a word wall, and they are very beneficial for students to look up and see different relationships between words and just to have a bank of all the words they've learned in a year. So as each sound spelling relationship is introduced, you can place a large card on the wall to show the students, and then add words to that card that contain that sound spelling. So if you were doing this with phonics, you could put like each vowel team on a card and then put words that have those teams in it on the wall near the card to show the students how those words relate to each other. And then as you go, you would add different words to the wall, and you would revisit the words throughout the week. So this could be done throughout the year, and each word should be reviewed before it's placed onto the wall. Another interesting thing that can be done with the word wall is that you can make it electronic. Especially with online learning, you could just create a Google slide or a Google Doc that you can add to that the students can view. So you would probably want to make it view only for your students, but you could send them a link so they can always see the updated versions of this word wall. Another thing that can be done with word walls is that they can be differentiated for the students. Maybe in like an older grade, students can make their own word wall and add their own words to a personal word wall that they have in their desk or on their desk. So for this, I've identified best practices 1 and 2 again, but also best practice 10, which is provide instruction in and practice with technologies that expand concepts and modes of communication. So with 1 and 2, they're actively engaged in the community because they have to look at the word wall and use those words on a daily basis. And the teacher is continuously monitoring the words that are going on that wall. And then the added best practice of technology is really important here, especially because it allows the students to always be looking at these new words that they're learning. The last activity that I have identified is the word sort. This can be used with many different categories, and it should be used throughout a phonics instructions program with all these different categories. So in terms of the instructional goal that I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, a word sort could be used for sorting short vowels, CVC words, and word families into their different categories. So first you would give a student a set of word cards, and all these cards would relate to certain categories that the student is working on. So if you're having the students do a word family sort, like the one shown on the screen, they would have only those categories and only words that match those categories in the sort that you've provided. Then you would have them sort the words into the different categories that are specified. This activity would be beneficial in a small group time because you are able as the teacher to make more corrections quickly, and you're able to address misconceptions with the students while they're doing the sort right in front of you. This would be a long-term activity because the students should be doing a new sort each time they learn a new spelling pattern or learn a new concept in their phonics instruction. Word sorts are very beneficial to students in the classroom. And the two best practices that I've identified are provide students with small group differentiated instruction that reflects the complex nature of literacy, reading, writing, listening, speaking, viewing, and visually representing. So in this, they are doing a little bit of reading, they're doing a little bit of representing because they're categorizing, and it's in a small group, and the instruction should be differentiated. So your students, each of your groups might not be working on the same sort. You want to make sure that you're hitting the students with what they actually need to learn. And best practice 8 is replace less relevant guided practice with more authentic inquiry-based opportunities. So after they finish their sorts, maybe you could let them create their own categories as a part of the inquiry and see how these different words can be sorted in a different way. And then here is just all of the sources that I used. I used the Phonics A to Z book, the best practices book for the best practices I mentioned with each strategy. I used an article from Reading Rockets, and then I used the Lens Design Reading Theory book from Tracy and Morrow. I also used information taken from Moodle that was adapted from an article that is linked there.